the Orioles. My goodness, one of the favorite backyard birds, especially for in the last 40 years. That's it. Melanie loves the Orioles whenever we have them here at the house and our past house. But what are the Orioles? They're okay. In the term and in ornithological terms, you'll hear me and we'll hear us talking about old world versus new world. So old world is Europe and Asia. New world are the Americas, and that's kind of how, obviously there's oceans that divide them, and that's why the birds there are so different, because of course they have long since evolved separated like that. So if you are familiar with old world Orioles, those that occur on that side of the planet, and then of course we have our Orioles, people kind of get confused because they really aren't even related. Of course, the name came from that because whenever the early naturalists came to North America and they were here, and they would see these birds that looked like birds that they were used to seeing in the old world. That's of course where the name would come from. So our Orioles here in North America actually belong in the blackbird group, and they're more related to red-winged blackbirds, common grackle, brown-headed cowbird, and yellow-headed blackbirds, things like that. That is their family of birds called Icteridae. The blackbirds were the family Oriolidae, or Oriolidae is an old world family, and it includes the old world Orioles, and there's like 40 some species that fall within that family, but they are not related to our Orioles at all. So we're talking about new world Orioles tonight, and those are the ones that we can find in this country, of course, in North America, and a little bit, of course, South America too, but we're not going to be worrying about those. So the most famous of all, maybe it's because of the baseball team, of course, is the Baltimore Oriole. It is also the most widespread of all the Orioles. It is basically from the Front Range of the Rocky Mountains, the plains, all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. Really is a widespread bird. Now they're neotropic migrants, of course. They spend their winter in the tropics. I know a few may overwinter in the Gulf states and down in Florida. It is possible, but they do mostly spend their winter in a lot. Those shade-grown coffee plantations are really, really important to Baltimore Orioles on their wintering grounds. I've seen Baltimore Orioles down in the Yucatan Peninsula and areas like that in the late winter, early spring, and they're very, very beautiful birds no matter where you see them. They are similar to the old world Orioles in that their diet, their size, their shape are all very similar. But one of the things that's really different, of course, is that bill structure. And that's where I always usually compare them to blackbirds, especially the red-winged blackbirds. And their bills are very, very similar structurally to that group, so that you can see how they're related. But you can't mistake as blaze orange and blackbird. Whenever the feeding of them began more kind of by accident. We were feeding hummingbirds. We've been feeding hummingbirds forever. And then all of a sudden these large black and orange birds start landing on hummingbird feeders and start drinking the sugar water. And of course, people are like blown away by this, how beautiful they are. And so they started devising ways to feed them and attract them. So they have really just exploded in popularity as a backyard bird for feeding purposes in the last really 40 years, 30 years. And it's amazing because a lot of us only get to have them for a couple of weeks, but we buy Oriole feeders and we buy our grape jelly and oranges and put them out for them. And they absolutely love it, and they entertain us. And if we're lucky, they'll stick around and they'll nest nearby and you get to see them longer. But they're a bird that really in our part of the world are a pretty short window of time. They come in mid-April. They get on their nesting habitats and they raise one brood of young, and they're out of here in our area, the Kansas City area. They're out of here by mid-July. And some of the younger birds, the ones that hatch this year, will linger a bit longer, but really those adults are in and out. And even the next one is even shorter than that. So this is the male Baltimore Oriole. Like I said, unmistakable. And here's a Carrie picture to share of a female or Baltimore Oriole at her eating our grape jelly, and they are. It's not as easy as an ID as everybody thinks it is, because immature male, first year male Baltimore Orioles, when they arrive, they usually don't have the full black hood, and they're very kind of blotchy. And sometimes females can have a degree of black in their head. So sometimes it's a bit of a confusing state to separate those two out. But they're Orioles. They're Baltimore Orioles for sure. For me, Baltimore Orioles have always been birds of large trees. And so along river areas, riparian areas, big cottonwoods and big sycamores, old trees in a well-established neighborhoods have them. They like older trees. They're not a bird of young timber. And so whenever areas are cut, and it takes many, many years for the trees to grow back, it takes a long, long time to get for them to have that habitat back again. Now, I hid the comments because it was blocking the way of the nest. And one of the most unique things, the most identifiable things with Orioles, of course, are their sock nest. Amazing how they weave these nests, these baskets, and they usually hang from right at the end of a limb. And of course, that's to discourage predators. For a raccoon to crawl out there onto that thinner part of the limb, and then it starts to sag with them and trying to get down to the nest, it makes it very challenging. And a lot of times those nests are pretty well concealed by lots of leaves. I remember my daughter, when she was in college at Kansas State University over in Manhattan, a rental house that she was in, we were moving furniture, and I just happened to catch this Baltimore Oriole sneaking around the tree up there, and I found the nest, and it was almost hanging right over her sidewalk. But it was really well concealed by a lot of leaves. But it was really cool, the nesting right there in her front yard. So, and another thing you might notice by this picture is look how light orange this male is, and they can vary a lot. This again here, the first one I showed, put him back on the screen. You can really, they can be luminescent orange all the way to light pale like this one in the nest here. So the males and females, what do we call that whenever you can tell them apart? Anyone? Sexual dimorphism, like cardinals. Well, Orioles are most Orioles are like that, but not all of them. So this is by far, like I said, the most famous of the Orioles, especially in our part of the world and east. But for you guys out west, you get to see this guy. This is the Bullock's Oriole, and depending upon how old your field guide is, you may not even see the name Baltimore and Bullock's in it. So because at one time they were lumped together into one species, they were known as Northern Orioles, and so they did not have their east and west identities back then, and they will interbreed, especially like in western Kansas and with the front range of the Rockies down into the plains where the Baltimore stretch west. They said that whenever they overlap, the Bullocks and Baltimores will interbreed. So that's why they joined them. But enough DNA research was able to be done and found out that they are definitely distinct species. The Bullock's Orioles are just absolutely gorgeous. So you guys out west are lucky enough to see them. And I actually think, from the ones that I have seen over the years when traveling out west and birding out west, is I think the Bullocks are actually a brighter orange than our Baltimores. It is a deep, beautiful orange. And look how huge that white wing patch is compared to the Baltimore, and which has a pretty small white wing patch. And this guy has a huge one. And of course, they don't have the solid black head like that. They both have the black backs, and they're gorgeous. And they are very much habits are the same. They are attracted to citrus and grape jelly and nectar and sugar water and drinking things like that. So their behavior and their sizes are very similar as well. Maybe the Bullocks may be a bit huskier for sure. So the Bullock's Oriole in the west, the Baltimore in the east, and you put them together, and this pretty much covers the U.S. between those two. So, but the next most common of the Orioles that we get to see is the Orchard Oriole. Beautiful. This is a beautiful male on my favorite Oriole feeder, by the way. That is the Oriole Fest. And it has the orange half cut there and has blobs of grape jelly on the top. And there's sugar water in the feeder. All three things that they like, and especially in the spring to attract them. Again, a lot of people will put dried mealworms or live mealworms when they can, when they're around, to get them hooked on those and feeding the young. But the Orchard Oriole is a unique bird in a lot of ways. So it's a little bit smaller than the Baltimore and the Bullocks, and it is a burnt red, if you are burnt orange, or whatever color you want to call it. It's just a striking bird, in my opinion. They're really, really beautiful. And I talked about how early, how short-lived time that the Baltimores are here, but man, orchards are here even shorter. They tend to be later arriving than the Baltimores, and they tend to leave a little bit earlier than the Baltimores. So their window of being here, and they're also pretty cool with their nesting. There'll be several several Orchard Orioles in nest in one really good tree. If the habitat's really good, lots of insects with their babies, there'll be several nesting fairly close together. They like really wet areas. Whenever Ruth and I do our breeding bird surveys, we always found them around ponds or wet areas with willows. Willows seems to be the tree of choice in Missouri on our breeding bird routes anyway. And they have a really jumbly song. It's not definitely different from the Baltimores. So the Orchard Orioles. Now, one of the things that makes this bird so darn unique and causes a great deal of confusion to especially beginning bird watchers is the female is really yellow. She's on the left here, completely yellow with a little darker wings, grayish wings. But she's, really different from that burnt orange and black male. And then, of course, we're used to males and females looking differently. But the one that really gets people is the bird on the right. This is a first-year male Orchard Oriole. So he hatched last year, and his first year back in his nesting territories, he is not burnt orange at all. He's yellow or greenish yellow, and he has this black face. The bill is still very much an Oriole bill. It sings an Oriole song. They can reproduce. They can mate with a female. But that first year, they look very different. And my 40 years of doing this bird has really confused so many people that are getting into bird watching. And I remember the first time I saw one. I was working on Fort Liberty back then, and I saw this one by a pond I was working at, and my first thought was black-throated green warbler, or something that all the way down. And then I was like, oh god, I forgot. Yeah, it's an Oriole. So it can confuse you for sure, and they're pretty widespread. The Orchard Orioles, mainly eastern, and they're really, really fun. And you'll see multiple Baltimores at your feeders to one orchard. Some people are lucky and have a little more, but for the most part, the orchards are less numerous. And again, like I said, they're a little bit smaller. But I always look forward to seeing those at the feeder. So the Orchard Oriole. Now we're going to move a little bit south, and that is the Hooded Oriole. This bird this picture was taken actually in just south of Tucson, Arizona, and Patagonia. And this bird is the Hooded Orioles had two really distinct colors out in the west, out here in Arizona, and points out there. They're more yellowish. The Hooded Orioles in Texas, especially East Texas and South, are much brighter orange, but they are the same birds. And this bib on its face, varies a lot. It can be fairly extensive, like this bird has a very extensive one, and then maybe not so extensive. And this is something that someone would see this, and maybe if they looked it up in the book, they might be able to get it confused. But the first year Orchard Oriole's face has very little black on it compared to the Hooded Oriole. So, and I don't know if anybody's going to, like I said, it's hard for me to keep up over here just yet. I'll catch up. But I remember with a bird watching group, we were last time we were out in Arizona bird watching, and this this hooded oriole came in and was drinking from water where we were at. And I says hooded oriole, and they all looked at me. I said, you have to think of the orange as the hood. And everyone went, oh, okay. Because obviously, when we think of hooded, we think of the black hood. But this bird, the name comes, you have to think of it as the orange as being the hood and the face and the neck being black. So this is a hooded oriole. This is a bird that every year, Mark Robbins is a curator of birds over at KU Museum, or just retired curator of birds at the KU Museum. He always reminds me to ask people to be on the lookout for this bird in the Kansas City area, because we're long overdue for seeing the hooded orioles in the Kansas City area. I think maybe we had one 2 years ago. Finally, one was identified. So, but they are mainly a south and southwestern bird. So you guys, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and over that way, you guys even up a little bit further north than that. This is a bird that you probably can get at your Oriole feeders and your hummingbird feeders. Look at the length of the bill on that bird. He has got that's a pretty sizable Oriole bill for sure. Beautiful. They are striking. And another southern bird. This is the Scott's Oriole. This is definitely an arid, dry desert oriole. Their habitat being very different from the wetland areas and the willow trees and the wet areas of orchards and Baltimore's and Bullock's. This guy is a desert bird, and they are beautiful. They are a lemon yellow. And we've had one the last 2 winters here in the South Kansas City area, which is really, I think, maybe the first 2 state records. The first state record, the same bird. Beautiful black hood, bright yellow. And first it was eating peanuts from a peanut feeder. And then this year, and then I saw a video from the homeowner the other day. It's found the mealworms, and it is just consuming the mealworm. So he's still hanging around, but it did leave, and I don't know if it went and nested in Texas or somewhere last year, but it was back again this year. Beautiful, stunning bird, and hopefully you guys get a chance to see that in the Southwest. And if you live in dry country, that's a definite bird that's a reward for living in that part of the world, because Scott's Orioles are really beautiful. I mean, the first one I ever saw was in Arizona many years ago at the Sonoran Desert Museum. I think it was out in the Cactus Garden, and just was blown away by it when I got to see that. So let's see, where are we going to? The two birds that occur in North America that have the smallest range, or there's 3 of them actually. The 2 of them here are just limited to the Rio Grande Valley. And different parts of the Rio Grande Valley, they are a little bit of an overlap. But the bright orange bird on the left is called an Altimira Oriole. And I love this picture because it's got the grapefruit half plugged in there. And that reminds me to tell people, people think of oranges and putting out oranges for Orioles, but you don't. If you've got grapefruits or lemons, kind of how this whole thing started with these Orioles feeding them the citrus was these people who winter Texans, or we call them, they live down in the valley in Arizona, have fruit trees in their yard. The Orioles are out there pecking on these the citrus out there that fall into the ground, and people started cutting the grapefruits that had fallen to the ground that weren't any good and stobbing them on limbs, and the Orioles love it. And they'll eat all kinds of citrus, not just oranges. Oranges are just the most successful, probably the most economical way to feed them. But this shows you that, boy, they'll definitely eat grapefruit too. So the Altimira Oriole, 3 of those 4 pictures are the Altimira. To the right and to the bottom of him. The picture, I included this picture on the bottom because it was a funny story. We were at a bird watching group. We were down in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, and it was the last day that we were there, and we were getting ready to leave from one of the parks that we were at and really start heading to the airport. And we came out from the hiking trails. This Altimira Oriole was on the side of our rental van and was seeing his reflection and was pecking at his reflection in the side window of our rental car. And Mary got that snapped a picture there. And the bird up in the upper right is also an Altimira Oriole building one of those long sock nests that was down there in one of the park, Benson Rio Grand State Park, I think is where that one was. And that bird has a nickname. It was known as Smudgy because it had this black smudge to its face, along with, instead of being such a nice clean bib, it was kind of smudgy looking. But that shows you them. But the bottom right, the orange greenish bird is called an Audubon's Oriole. And this too is a Mexican species like the Altimira that occurs just on the Rio Grande River area, a little bit further inland than that. I know you Texas birders may have them. And they tell me Audubon's Orioles will come to feeders, and they'll feed at feeders. And of course, it's limited range where they are, so you're lucky if you actually get to live down there and get them coming. But one of the things about the Audubon's Oriole, it is the only truly hooded Oriole that we have, meaning the hood is completely black all the way around his head, and the back is black. The back is greenish colored. So whereas Baltimore and Orchard Orioles have black heads, they have black down their back. So they don't have that hooded look, whereas this guy does. And he's got a big bill. The males and females singing back and forth to each other. And, this is a good, and it's a big bird. The first time I ever saw one was in Salanino, Texas, right on the Rio Grande River. And they are pretty secretive. They kind of skulk around in the thicker bush, whereas you hear them singing, and luckily they'll pop out. You can see them. So the Altimira and the Audubon's Oriole, unless you live there, your chances of seeing them are not very good unless you do some traveling. I had Altimira Oriole on Cozumel Island when I was down there back on the cruise. So, and then here is one that is really limited in range too. This is the spot-breasted Oriole of southeastern Florida. This bird was introduced down there many years ago and has established a breeding population, and it's still going today. I saw one 3 or 4 years ago. I was down there. They are beautiful birds, and the males and females look alike, and had 2 orange flashes fly across and land in a tree close to me. But they do have varying degrees of black spots on the chest, as the name would suggest. But if you live down there in Southeast Florida, this is the only Oriole you get to see, with the exception of maybe during migration. And I think the short-lived for the Baltimore's passing through in orchards, but this is a bright orange, beautiful bird. So spot-breasted Oriole, Altimira and Audubon's Oriole, Scott's Oriole, hooded Oriole, and the Orchard Oriole female and first-year male, the adult Orchard Oriole, the Bullock's Oriole, and the Baltimore Oriole. So there is the Oriole family. Like I said, the contact information is below, and if you give us a like, give us a share. Until then, let's come by and talk birds.